Today we have one of the Lord of the Ring commanders, Aragorn, Hornburg Hero. So for 1, a red, a green and a white, we get a 4/4 legendary human soldier. Attacking creatures you control have first strike and renown 1. And whenever a renowned creature you control deals combat damage to a player, double the number of +1/+1 counters on it. So it's basically an aggressive attack deck where you're trying to get your creatures to continuously hit opponents so that they get even stronger to then do it again and again. So this is the commander. Rising of the Day, 2 and a red for an enchantment. Creatures you control have haste, and legendary creatures you control get +1/+0. Sungrass Prairie, a non-basic land that you pay 1 and tap to add green and white. Uncivil Unrest, 4 and a red for an enchantment. Non-token creatures you control have riot, and if a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage instead. Cathar's Crusade. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Hardened Scales, 1 green mana for an enchantment. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many +1/+1 counters are put on it instead. Path of Ancestry is a non-basic land that enters tapped, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity. When that mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with your commander, scry 1. Ominous Cemetery, a non-basic land that taps for colourless, or you can pay 5, tap it and exile it. 2 for target creature. Target creature's owner shuffles it into their library. Anim Pakal, 1000th Moon, 1 red/white for a 1/2 human soldier. Whenever you attack with 1 or more non-gnome creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on Anim Pakal, then create X 1/1 colourless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Anim Pakal. Fortified Village. As it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a forest or plainsguard from your hand. If you don't, it enters tapped, and it taps for green or white. Agatha's Soul Cauldron, 2 mana for a legendary artifact. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any colour to activate abilities of creatures you control. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and you can tap it to exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Rockfall Vale, a non-basic land that enters tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, and it taps for red or green. Moss Fire Valley, a non-basic land that you can pay 1 and tap to add green and red. Moorland Rescuer, 5 and a white for a 4/4 human knight. When it dies, return any number of other creature cards with total power X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is its power. You then exile this card. Myrel, Shield of Argiv, 3 and a white for a 3/4 human soldier. During your turn, your opponent can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifact, creatures or enchantments. When she attacks, create X 1/1 colourless soldier artifact creature tokens, where X is the number of soldiers you control. Shalai and Halar, 1 red, green, white for a 3/3 angel elf with flying and vigilance. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, it deals that much damage to target opponent. A basic plains. A basic mountain. Court of Garenbrig, 1 and 2 green for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch, and at the beginning of your upkeep, distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among up to 2 target creatures. Then if you're the monarch, double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Command Tower, a non-basic land that taps for any 1 colour in your commander's colour identity. Secluded Courtyard, a non-basic land that when it enters you choose a creature type. You can tap it to add 1 colourless mana, or you can tap it to add 1 mana of any colour. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, or activate an ability of a creature, or creature card of the chosen type. Legolas's Quick Reflexes, 1 green mana for an instant with Split Second. Untap target creature until end of turn against hexproof reach, and whenever this creature becomes tapped, it deals damage equal to its power up to 1 target creature. Sigardian Zealot, 4 and a green for a 3/3 human cleric. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose any number of creatures with different powers. Each of them get +X/+X and gain vigilance until end of turn, where X is Sigardian Zealot's power. Naya Panorama, a non-basic land that taps for colourless, or you can pay 1, tap it and sack it to search your library for a basic mountain, forest or plains, and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle your library. Moss Diamond, 2 mana for an artifact that enters tapped, and you can tap it for green mana. Fury Calm Snarl, a non-basic that enters, you may reveal a mountain or plains card from your hand. If you don't, it enters tapped, and you can tap it for red or white. Temple of Abandon. Enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters you scry 1, and then you can tap it for red or green. Rohirrim Charges. 2 red white for a 4/4 human knight. You may exert it as it attacks. When you exert a creature, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an equipment card. Put that card onto the battlefield Put that card onto the battlefield attached to that creature. Then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. A basic mountain. Scattered Groves. Enters the battlefield tapped, and it can tap for green or white. You can also pay 2 to cycle it. Wende Pride of Femeref. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. 3 and a white for a 2/2 human knight with double strike. Creatures you control with first strike have double strike. Ruby Darling Tracker. Red green for a 1/2 human scout with haste. When Ruby attacks while you control a creature with power 4 or greater, Ruby gets +2/+2 until end of turn. She can also tap for red or green. Raging Ravine. Enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it for red or green. You can also pay 2, a red and a green, and until end of turn, it becomes a 3/3 elemental creature, with whenever this creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's still a land. Anduril Narsil Reforged. 2 mana for an equipment with Ascend. Whenever equipped creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. If you have the city's blessing, put 2 counters on each creature you control instead. Enterprising Scallywag. I love the name of that card. 1 and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Pirate. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, create a treasure token. A basic plains. Sunbaked Canyon. A non-basic that you can tap and pay 1 life to add red or white. Or you can pay 1 and tap it and sack it to draw a card. Evolving Wilds. A non-basic that you can tap and sack to search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Marble Diamond. 2 mana for an artifact that enters tapped, and you can tap it for 1 white mana. Talisman of Unity. 2 mana for an artifact. You can tap it to add colourless mana, or you can tap it to add green or white, and it deals 1 damage to you. Goblusen Forest. A non-basic that you can tap to add colourless, or you can tap to add red or green, and it deals 1 damage to you. Elite Scale Guard. 4 and a white for a 2/3 human soldier. When it enters the battlefield, +1/+1 counter on it attacks. Tap target creature defending player controls. Thalia, Heretic Cathar. 2 and a white for a 3/2 human soldier with first strike. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Nyleth of the Dire Hunt. 2 and 2 green for a 3/3 human warrior. Whenever one or more creatures you control fight or become blocked, draw a card, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay 2 and then hybrid red or green. If you do, double target creature's power until end of turn. That creature must be blocked at this combat if able. Aragorn and Arwen wed. 4 green white for a 3/6 human elf noble with vigilance. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. You gain 1 life for each creature you control. Fumiko the Low Blood. 2 red for a 3/2 human samurai. Fumiko has Bushido X, where X is the number of attacking creatures, and creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able. Liquimetal Torque. 2 mana for an artifact that taps for colourless, or you can tap it for target non-land permanent to become an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. Champion of Lamholt. 1 and 2 green for a 1/1 human warrior. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lamholt's power cannot block creatures you control, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lamholt. A basic Plains. Unclaimed Territory. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. It can tap for colourless, or you can tap it to add 1 mana of any colour. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells of the chosen type. Adriana, Captain of the Guard. 3 red-white for a 4/4 human knight with melee. Other creatures you control have melee. Wild Beastmaster. 2 in a green for a 1/1 human shaman. Whenever it attacks, each creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is Wild Beastmaster's power. Micaeus the Lunarch. X and white for a 0/0 human cleric. Micaeus enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. You can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on Micaeus, or you can tap it and remove a counter to put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. Gimli's Reckless Might. 3 and a red for an enchantment. Creatures you control have haste, and whenever you attack, if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater, target attacking creature you control fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Torrens, Fist of the Angels. 1 green-white for a 2/2 human cleric with training. cast a creature spell, create a 1/1 green and white human soldier. Creature token with training. Hedron Archive. 4 mana for an artifact that can tap to add 2 colourless mana. You may also pay 2, tap it and sack it to draw 2 cards. Veleron Wardens. 2 and a green for a 1/3 human monk with Renown 2. Whenever a creature you control becomes renowned, draw a card. War's Toll. 3 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, tap all lands that player controls. If a creature an opponent controls attacks, all creatures that opponent controls attacks if able. Inspiring Call. 2 and a green for an instant. Draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. Restless Prairie. A non-basic that enters tapped. You can tap it for green or white, or you can pay 2, a green and a white, for it to become a 3/3 green and white llama creature until end of turn. Another great creature type there, a llama. Whenever Restless Prairie attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Bright Palm. Soul Awakener. 1 red, green, white for a 4/3 fox shaman with backup 1. Whenever this creature attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature. That creature can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Exotic Orchard. A non-basic that you can tap to add 1 mana of any colour that a land an opponent controls could produce. Canopy Vista. A non-basic that enters tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands, and it taps for green or white. The commander's favourite, Soul Ring. 1 mana for an artifact that taps for 2 colourless mana. A basic forest. Temple of Plenty. A non-basic that enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters you scry 1. It taps for green or white. Victory's Envoy. 3 and 2 white for a 3/3 human cleric. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. Arcane Signet. 2 mana for an artifact that you can tap to add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity. Guardian Scale Lord. 4 mana and a white for 3/4 dragon with a backup 1 and flying. Whenever this creature attacks, return target non-land permanent card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is this creature's power. Felidar Retreat. 3 and a white for an enchantment with landfall. You can either create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. Elephant Warrior. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Virtue of Loyalty. 3 and 2 white mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Untap those creatures. And it's also got an adventure of 1 and a white for Ardenvale Fealty. It's an instant where you can create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. Conclave Sledge Captain. 5 and a green for a 4/4 elephant soldier with backup 1, backup 1, backup 1. It also has Trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. Crowsan Verge. It's a non-basic that enters tapped, and you can tap it to add colourless, or you can pay 2, tap it and sack it to search your library for a forest card and a plains card, and put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Authority of the Consuls. 1 white mana for an enchantment. Creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain 1 life. Swiftblade Vindicator. Red-white for a 1/1 human soldier with double strike, vigilance and trample. Abzan Falconer. 2 and a white for a 2/3 human soldier with Outlast white. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has flying. Slayer's Stronghold. It's a non-basic that you tap for colourless, and you can pay red, white, and tap it for target creature to get +2/+0 and gain vigilance and haste until end of turn. General Furious Rockerick. 1, a red and a white for a 3/1 human soldier. It has hexproof from monocoloured, and whenever you cast a multicoloured spell, create a 4/4 red and white golem artifact creature token. Farewell. 4 white for a sorcery where you can choose 1 or more. Exile all artifacts, exile all creatures, exile all enchantments, or exile all graveyards. Tajik Blade of the Legion. 2 red-white for a 2/2 human soldier with indestructible. Whenever Tajik and at least 2 other creatures attack, Tajik gets +5/+5 until end of turn. Rugged Prairie. A non-basic that you can tap for colourless, or you can pay hybrid red or white and tap it to add 2 red, or red-white, or white-white. Sunhome Fortress of the Legion. A non-basic that taps for colourless, or you can pay 2 red and a white and tap it for target creature to gain double strike until end of turn. A basic mountain. Mirror Style Master. 4 and 2 red for a 3/3 human warrior with backup 1. Whenever this creature attacks, for each attacking modified creature you control, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that creature. Exile the tokens at the end of combat. Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, 1 and a white for a 2/1 human soldier with first strike. Non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. Master Warcraft, 2 and then a hybrid red-white twice for an instant. Cast this spell only before attackers are declared. You choose which creatures attack this turn. You choose which creatures block this turn and how those creatures block. Sundown Pass. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, and it taps for red or white. Abzan, Battle Priest, 3 and a white for a 3/2 human cleric with Outlast white. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has lifelink. Cinderglade, a non-basic that enters tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands, and it taps for red or green. Temple of Triumph. It enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters you scry 1, and it taps for red or white. Champion of the Parish, 1 white mana for a 1/1 human soldier. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Parish. Duskguard Captain, 2 and a green for a 2/3 human warrior with Outlast green. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has Trample. Auroch Champion, 2 white for a 1/1 human cleric with protection from black and from red. Whenever another creature comes into play, you may gain 1 life. Heron Blade Elite, 2 and a green for a 1/1 human warrior with vigilance. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Heron Blade Elite, and you can tap it to add X mana of any one colour where X is its power. A basic forest. Cemetery Protector, 2 and 2 white for a 3/4 human soldier with flash. When Cemetery Protector enters the battlefield, exile a card from a graveyard, and when you play a land or cast a spell, if it shares a card type with the exiled card, create a 1/1 white human creature token. This is the rhythm of the wild. Oh, wild. No, I'm joking. 1, a red and a green for an enchantment. Creature spells you control can't be countered. Non-token creatures you control have Riot. Thalia's Lieutenant, 1 and a white for a 1/1 human soldier. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other human you control. And whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Thalia's Lieutenant. Spellbook Vendor, 1 and a white for a 2/2 human peasant with vigilance. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay 1. When you do, create a sorcerer roll token attached to target creature you control. And that was the last card of the deck. I've been Foamy ASMR. I want to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And if you leave a comment below, I'll get back to you. Is there any cards that you think I'm missing from the deck? Let me know in the comments and I'll definitely discuss it with you. I will see you in the next video.